Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. You know, in his brilliant book on managing your innermost self, our guest today, Shasheen Shah, speaks of recurring emotional triggers, ones that have haunted some of us for decades. And in dealing with his own emotional triggers, Shasheen writes, I discovered that although I was 40, I was still reacting as my 10-year-old self. And that is our critical topic for today. How to manage that needy, screaming inner child who can still impact even the most successful people. In the last couple of years, I personally have discovered that managing my innermost child has been a most essential task. This subject is a sweet spot of our guest today. Shasheen Shah is founder of Coherent Strategies. He works with high-level leaders, CEOs, and maverick entrepreneurs, and he is author of this new and really important book, The Kid and the King. Today will be special, I promise. Let's bring on Shasheen Shah. Shasheen, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Hey, it's so great to be here, Charlie. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I can't wait. You know, I've read through your book, and there are so many pertinent thoughts, and I can relate to so many on my level and the people that I coach, and I just think you bring so much to the table. I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Let's get into it. What hits you the most? Yeah.
Well, you know what? Before I get to that, I'm going to do something that I've never ever done before, and every author, I'm sure, wishes I would do this. And I want to start with your book. And
okay.
and rarely do I start with a book. Somewhere it ends up at the end. But today we're starting The Kid and the King. I found it a compelling and insightful read. Tell me about the book. What is it about? And why is it essential for all of us to be aware of the content?
Okay, well, I'll answer it this way. This book was written, well, it's interesting, right? We coach and teach what we need the most help with, right? That's kind of how it works in my mind. And for me...
So the coach teaches against his own needs.
Yeah, pretty
or
much.
Or her own needs. I get it.
Coaching and teaching the stuff that right? So the book's about the emotional mastery process. Well, guess who needed the most emotional mastery? That was me, right?
Yeah,
so It's a book that could have easily been called, Why Do Really Smart People Do Dumb Things? I say that because what I wanted to address in this book is the confusion, I would say, that I had and that my clients had with, on one hand, knowing themselves as extremely successful, bright, intelligent, good-natured people that would be tripping on themselves, whether it be addictions or just procrastination or confusion about simple things. I mean, these were Harvard-educated, Ivy League-educated, masters, PhD level, people that have climbed the ladder and gotten degrees and titles. And for some reason, just, I don't know, there was this duality. And why is it that I can do all of these things so well, and yet I find myself acting out, lashing out, or engaged in behaviors that are not consistent with who I am? So the premise of the book is that what if there's just two parts of us? The book's inspiration actually came from the movie A Beautiful Mind. That all about John Nash's multiple personality disorder and his journey. And I remember, for those of you not familiar with the story, it's about a really brilliant mathematician that has multiple personality disorders. And along the way, it slowly becomes more and more debilitating. So you kind of follow his journey, and he gets married, has a baby, and it gets to the point where he can't function, and there's almost a threatening situation with his wife and his child, and they put him on medication. And the medication works, and it solves issue with these multiple personalities. And these three distinct characters, personalities, were kind of personified and made live in the movie, and they would talk to him. There was a spy, there was his college buddy, and there was this little girl, and they were characters that would come into his consciousness and kind of disrupt his daily flow. Well, he became this automaton, basically, sitting on his porch smoking cigarettes, and he was this brilliant mathematician, and he wanted to get back into the game. And he had this epiphany one day that is like, wow, you know, these voices in my head can't actually be real, because that little girl has never grown up. She's still young, and at that time it had been 25 some odd years that had gone by. She's like, she should be in college by now. Wait a second, this can't be. So therefore, these voices cannot be real. Therefore, I should not give them any weight, and I am going to go on a diet of the mind. And in that diet of the mind, you see him begin to develop a new relationship with the voices that are in his head. And so the movie ends with him kind of assimilating back into academic life, getting recognized by his peers for his achievement in mathematics. And at the end, there's this scene where the dean of students, who had been this big advocate, says, so John, he's like, what happened to the voices? You know, how's it going? And in that moment, the voices all pop up, right? And John Nash looks at him and just kind of acknowledges them and smiles, and he's like, it's good. And he walks down this path with his wife. And I remember that struck me, because at that time, I had voices in my head. You know, that voice, you know, that you hear at night, in the morning, in the middle of the day. And for those of you who's like, what voice? That's that voice that just went off in your head. That's the voice I'm talking about.
Yeah, that negative voice that has
right.
all of these haunting things to tell us.
That's right. And so what is that? Where does this fear, doubt, insecurity, procrastination, where does that self-loathing, where does this stuff that I realized that I wasn't the only one that was having it, no matter how successful you were, no matter how much you accomplished, no matter what you have done, human beings, I found, everyone had this voice that would say some of the most debilitating, harmful, mean things to ourselves that would then lead us down this path of, well, I'm not going to do it today. I'm going to do it later. I'm not going to do that, you know, or you get frustrated, you get upset, you're perceiving things as threat. There's this kind of almost illusion that happens about your reality through this voice. And so the idea was, well, I know that the best thinking that I was exposed to is that, well, you just develop some self-control, Shasheen. You know, suck it up. Like, hey, you know, yeah, you got to go and spite it. And it was this very masculine, let's crush it, let's dominate it, let's go fix it, go get a coach, go get a therapist, go get some drugs and medication, do something. But, you know, you have to overcome and defeat this voice. And what I found was there was no defeating the voice. The harder I tried to defeat it, the more discipline and control I put on top of it, even though it would allow me maybe to get to the next level, it would come back with a vengeance.
So what was the solution?
So the idea was, what if we changed the relationship with this part of ourselves? What if, instead of trying to fight this voice, instead of trying to, you know, try to crush it or conquer it, we actually become so familiar with it, like it's, I mean, you know, one of my favorite things that I think I could, the moment I really got it was when a mentor said to me, he said, Shasheen, you're just not that interesting. And I said, what? What do you mean by that? And he said, it's like, it's the same thing. It's like, I hear all these childhood fears and anxieties, you're not good enough, and your dad, and, you know, you're Indian, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's the same story, same triggers. It's the same circumstances. It's the same kinds of people. It's the same tone of voice. It's the same thing again and again and again. He said, we just need to take some responsibility now for this and recognize that these conditions are always going to exist. And it's almost predictable that if you walk into a place where there's someone that has more money than you, has got a better degree than you, has more power than you, is better looking than you, whatever it might be, that little kid's going to come in and you're going to start to feel insecure.
Let me slip in here.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I want to slip in because one of the things I've written a lot about, I wonder what you think, and that is I've called it making friends with your demons, but it's the childhood is not a demon. It's just it's a past self, but it is making friends with that, and you talk about it. There's something you write that I really like, and you write about the dangers of with this childhood thinking. We have childhood resentments, and that it commonly ends up with what you write. I sort of minimalized it. Is that it commonly ends up with anger, oversensitivity, disregard for rules and authority, cynicism, weary resignation, and negative opinions. Yuck. And you know what's most troubling about that, Shasheen? Is half of those define my life.
All of us. It's like, welcome to the club.
No kidding. I know.
Wait, you're not that interesting, by the way.
Yeah. So what's new? But that does help us. That does help us relate as coaches. That helps us relate to our clients. And just as people in society, it helps us relate to other people, because if we can relate to our frailty, we can see the frailty and the issues of other people, and we can better identify with them and understand them on a truly co-reciprocal level rather than in a judgmental sort of way.
100%. I mean, you take that conversation and you apply that to the world at hand, and now you're onto something about humanity, because, the moment, you can begin to end the fight with yourself, the moment you begin to see how, all we are these just patterns and conditioned patterns, and that's all that's happening in our life, and we're just, the way we're wired, our limbic system, and how we take in data through our five senses, and how it gets stored, and how our brains are wired for the survival, and how really there's nothing to really survive these days, but we're trying to emotionally survive. And yes, everyone has a story. And when you, at least I'll just speak for me, when we come to grips with, okay, as experienced by my 10-year-old self, there was some stuff that came down the pike that at that time was devastating. Monsters under the bed was life or death back then. And if we understand, we don't even need a degree in this to just get the basics of that, those instances left the mark. And that now colors our vision today and how we show up in certain situations if we perceive them to be threatening, if it makes us look bad, if we're insecure in some way. And so once we give ourselves that space to say, wow, okay, I get it, you can now suddenly look to your spouse, look to your kids, look to your environment, and start saying, I wonder, you seem upset. I wonder what part of your kid is triggered right now. We're like, wow, something must be going on over there. That's just, I must be doing something. Was it something that I said? And it's not some threat, but what do? We don't do it that way, right? We see somebody acting out, we're like, oh my God, how dare they? Yeah. And then our kid reacts, and then we start in, and then they start, and it just escalates really quickly. But the moment you can start looking at the world through, first ourselves, through a more compassionate lens, it allows that to extend into our immediate world and to humanity at large. And for leaders, for example, this is a classic leadership fail, where you've got individual performers out there that are brilliant, and they are like the give me the ball guys, give me the ball and I'm going to nail this. And they're hard work, discipline, and hard work, discipline, and hard work, discipline, and hard work, discipline. And they win that game. They know how to do that game really well, and they get promoted. Now they're going to manage a team.
But they're not satisfying. They're not approaching or even addressing the real need that's driving them to do that.
Oh, that's right. And
we talked about that in a book title that a friend of mine was going to write that never wrote, that I love the title, and that is The High Value of Low Self-Esteem.
There you go.
And that's what we're trying to fill the hole of self-esteem with productivity and accomplishments, and they just do not fill the hole, yet we don't realize that, so we keep filling that hole, and so the lower the self-esteem, the more the value of the person, because they're going to be even more productive. So
That's right. And well said. Well said.
You write, and I like this, at a critical point in your life, and at 40, you realized that you had some emotional and relationship problems with the family members. And what you decided, because you had spent the first 30 years from 10 to 40, you had spent the first 30 years evaluating the other person, evaluating the faults, the deficiencies, the bad things that person did, and you realized at some point that this was more about you than it was about this other person, and so you decided to take a long and hard look at yourself. What did that look like, to take a look at yourself? How did you do that?
Man, so like here I am, 40. I'm a coach. I'm a consultant. I'm a well-paid coach and consultant at that point. I definitely ran up the ladder and rung some bells.
Charge stupid money. Yeah, I understand.
I think all of us, and I see other coaches and other practitioners where there is something out of alignment. Like, well, we have the intellectual understanding of the mechanisms that are at work in productivity, and the mechanisms that are at work at forgiveness, and the mechanisms that are, all the information is there. I mean, my gosh, the Serenity Prayer, how simple can they make it for us, right? And yet we spent our lives, spent my life literally looking for that wisdom to know the difference. And I don't know, I think there's a point at which you just get tired enough where you're just like, I've had it. I can't continue to experience, in this case, my father this way. I can't have some guy 3,000 miles away from me at that time get on the phone and send me off the deep end, really upset. And here's someone like me, I'm a coach, I'm a consultant. I mean, I'm helping people with this, helping relationships, and wait a second, this is so out of whack right now. And I still had this childish relationship. I had not grown up yet with this one relationship with my dad. And I remember I took a page right out of this. It was the prayer of Francis of Assisi that someone had given to me years ago. And I caught a glimpse of it, and I remember reading it at that time, and I was just struck by, I forget, the prayer essentially says, seek not to be understood, but to be understanding. Seek not to be loved, but to be loving, because it's in giving.
Here, let me read it. I wrote it down.
Yeah, please.
Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light, and where there is sadness, joy. Help me not to seek so much to be consoled as to console, and that may I understand to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. That's St. Francis of Assisi from somewhere in the late 1100s to early 1200s.
Yeah. Thank you for reading that and just taking a moment there to just take that in, because the message is simple, but the practice is put me on a journey that really helped transform who I am today as an adult. Because what I had to do is, I was clever enough to say to myself, I was like, I knew it was a question of being somebody different, not doing something different. So I got that distinction. I was like, well, then who would I need to be to give to my father everything that I had been asking of him? When I was asking him to be more, more interested in my life, more communicative, more loving, more engaging, more this. I had a list. And I looked at that list, and I was like, well, am I any of those things for him? And I was like, no. And then the thought of me being that for him I mean, my first reaction was, hell no. No.
But you know what you realized, and what catches what I as I read about that story, what made me think is you realized he was going through the same things you were.
Oh.
Is that was his life story with his father?
I mean, 100%, and that's what the result was when I finally, the first step in that, though, before I got to that place, was just simply the idea. This is where this word emotional generosity came from for me. It was like, well, I wasn't willing to constitute myself as an emotionally generous person and give freely. I knew intellectually through my Eastern studies, I'm like, yeah, I should be able to light candles and light this person up with that, give freely without any attachment. I mean, I understood it intellectually, but I realized that I was so blocked in this instance for whatever part of divine inspiration in that moment. I decided that it was time for me to lean into that one and do whatever and try to just push myself in that direction. I really did want to be someone that was capable of freely giving. I knew intellectually that by me not being able to do that, I was going to keep being stuck in this place, and it was unacceptable at that moment for me too. So that's when I decided to go back over the holidays, right around this time, and go back and start to ask questions and start to actually have him just be in my presence and me be the cure, basically doing all of the things, being all of the things I want him to be. I just did that for him. And I will tell you, it was nothing short of the miraculous. To this day, I still get goosebumps thinking about this story where I saw this man who I had been in relationship with as a young little boy, as a child, at the age of 40. Suddenly, it was like something happened. It was like the tide shifted, and suddenly I'm looking at this little boy. And he's just going, yeah, and then I do this, and right now I'm this, and I could just see him light up like the lights of a Christmas tree. And I could just, I just for a moment there looked at him, I was like, oh my gosh, he's been wanting all of this from his adult son, who's 40 years old, who's been unwilling to give that to him. And in the moment of me giving him that space, I will tell you, things have never been the same in the most beautiful way. And yeah, sure, do we still have our bumps and bruises along the way? Absolutely. But today, it's a whole nother world. And I'll tell you, in the book, I tell the story about that at Christmas dinner. My dad, I spent years in the therapist's office, them telling me, well, he's never going to say he's proud of you, Shasheen. Listen, you just got to move on. You're 40 years old. He's going to be what he's going to be. You got to agree to disagree, and that's how it's going to go down. And we were about to start dinner, and I said, well, what do you do, Dad? Because I hadn't come back for Christmas in years. And he said, well, you're the coach. What do you want to do? I said, well,
what do you do?
So I was like, yeah, what do you want to do? So
Coach us.
I just started to acknowledge everybody. I just started acknowledging, and I said to Dad, thank you, for the man that you are and the life that you've granted us and the opportunities and education and the coaching and the therapy and, who I get to be today is someone that makes a difference in life. And I owe that to you. And, I mean, it was like you could hear a pin drop in the room. And my dad just looks at the table and he said, son, I'm proud of the man that you are today. And I'm tearing up right now even thinking about it. There was not a dry eye on the table. Everyone had known the brutal relationship that he and I had, the fights and the yelling and screaming over the years. And, in that moment, it was like that one thing I'd been asking for my whole life, that really feeling of hey, Dad's proud of me. I've done good. It was like a little boy inside of me. It was just like that, got his little gold star. And that was the beginning of just recognizing, gosh, I'm actually capable of giving this. I'm actually able to receive this. And then that's really when a whole nother kind of stage of life opened up for me. And these past decade has been. Let's
hold on that amazing. Because I want to get to that. But I want to ask a question first.
Yeah, please.
I think help sort of frame this a bit. And early on, I started with a quote out of your book, although I sort of did editorial privilege on it. I discovered that although I was 40, I was still reacting as a 10-year-old. And that is what we do, is when that inner child that, we get anger and fear and shame and who knows what all from that, is that we still behave as if the inner child is in control. We still see it through those eyes. And I had a therapist on the show, Shasheen, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that we were talking about this, and she said, you need to look at this, Charlie, through adult eyes. No one had ever told me that before. No one had ever told me. I had always viewed it through the childhood eyes. So that was the filter. Everything went through that. So I was abandoned. I was rejected. I was blah, blah, blah. But when I looked at it through adult eyes, I could begin to see why my parents were in a position that was the only response that they could be, was the way they dealt with me. And it wasn't harmfully. It was just, it didn't do me any good psychologically. But I could understand my parents. And so it's that question, not why did they do what they did, but what happened to them that made them act that way. And when I looked at that through those eyes, Shasheen, it was life-changing. It just, everything was completely different. And that seems to me to be, it seems like what you did. Do those words resonate with you at all?
Oh, man, you're nailing it. Absolutely. What I said to my dad at one point was like, what was it like having me as your son?
Oh, my.
This angry, stoned, Grateful Dead following, dope smoking, acid eating, mushroom, like just freaking wearing tie-dye shirts. Like, what was it like being in the Indian community when they asked you, what is your son doing? You're like, I don't know. He's on tour with the Dead this summer. I don't know. Or, he's off skiing. He's off hiking some mountain. What was it like for you coming home and seeing the glazed look on my face, me coming home late at night, me throwing tantrums, running around the house like a lunatic? And my dad looked at me and was like, you're growing up, aren't you? Damn, it took me a couple of years,
Oh,
but
that's
yeah,
great. What
right? Like, what was it like for them at that time when they were in their 30s?
Tell me.
What was going on? What kind of financial worries were they? I mean, this guy was working his tail off. I used to, blame him for never being around. Well, yeah, guess what? You got to go to Colgate University. You got to go to school and graduate with no debt.
Yeah.
You got to travel around the world. You got to have therapists and coaches. You got to do all these things in spite of your selfish, self-righteous, self-centered world of yours. My goodness. That was the moment I was like, oh.
Let me tell you what I want to do right now. I want to take a break because I want to change the direction a little bit. So we've talked about the need, and we talked about some things that you have done, but you, Shasheen, have created a process, an emotional mastery process, and you have this acronym OCEAN that I can't wait to get into. And so I think some of this is really going to help our listeners in articulating very specific actions we can take to appropriate where you're trying to go. And let's take a quick break, and we'll get right back into that.
Absolutely.
Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie and my very special guest, Shasheen Shah, who is an executive coach, founder of Coherent Strategies, and he works with high-level leaders, and he's the author of a book that I suggest, if any of this resonates with you, this is a very, very helpful book, The Kid and the King. I will have links on the show notes so you can get to it. So, Shasheen, we talked about your issues and the issues with what may be surprising to some people is that highly, highly, highly successful people can have some deeply, deeply, deeply troubling childhood emotional problems or issues, not necessarily a problem, but issues that they've yet to deal with, and you help them do that. And you've created a couple processes that I would really like to explore. I read about the EMP, or the Emotional Mastery Process. What the world, who doesn't want to master your emotions? What's that all about?
Well, I mean, it was like, the marketing people told me you got to turn it into a process. That's really what it is. But, I had to break it down for myself, right? It was just, how do I slow this thing down and start to make sense of it? And this is like an amalgamation of a lot of different things that are out there. The idea behind this was basically managing triggers. This came from the fact I was like, well, okay, I don't care how much money you have, how successful you are, but if you're ranting and raving, if you're upset, if you're getting triggered and using that trigger feedback loop to act out on your addictions, you go through it, the porn, gambling, alcohol, drugs, whatever it might be, where you're getting frustrated by the world, you're getting pissed off by the world. Well, that's no way to live life. And I saw a lot of people that are very high performers getting pissed off quite a bit. And so I was like, okay, well, let's see if we can break this down and understand differently. So the acronym OCEAN is the one that I use that I think is the most useful, and it breaks it down into 5 basic questions. So if you feel like you're feeling an undesired emotional state, you can stop and just say, okay, well, step 1 is, what did I observe?
No, am I writing this down, or am I just thinking about it, Shasheen?
Well, I mean, I think it's really helpful. What I would suggest is, if you want to really take yourself on, do this for the next 30 days, every single day. As it comes up, remember OCEAN. Okay, what did I observe? And you want to think on this one like just the facts, ma'am, just data. So, for example, great example, like, in an office, right? It's 60 degrees on the thermostat. That is an undebatable fact. There's no interpretation. It's just 60 degrees. Well, if I just came in from Florida, I'm like, can somebody please turn up the heat? It's freezing here. I need a sweater. I'm wearing a puffy, and I'm like, got wool socks on, and it's 60 degrees in the office. It's ridiculous. Well, the other folks just came back from the mountains of Telluride, where I live, and I'm in there at 60 degrees. I'm like, wow, it's beautiful. It's nice, comfortable. I'm in a T-shirt. That's great, right? And so what you want to be able to say is, like, what I observed is at 60 degrees. Well, if we come to the next letter, C in OCEAN, then there's a conclusion that we come to. So we observe data, and then we conclude something about that data. Now, this step, I think, is where your entire life lives, right? So you're concluding something about objective data. So another example would be like, someone cuts you off. Well, okay, well, what did you observe? Well, a car, was flying down the road and came right in front of me really fast, and he cut me off. Well, what did you conclude? Well, you conclude a lot of things. He's a bleepity beep, 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 he's a this, he's a that, or, maybe he's gone his way to the emergency room. I don't know. But there's a conclusion that we apply to observable facts. And we can get into, the book is really an exploration of what is it in your brain? What is it what's in that filter that takes that data and offers the conclusion, right? And what we say in the book, or what I say in the book, is that it's basically our conditioned past. So again, if I'm from Florida, my conditioning, it's been like 80 degrees down there. When I come to 60, it's freezing. Well, in Telluride, it's been 55. 60, it's comfortable. So we begin to set up this world where what people are concluding is really based on where you come from, how you grew up, what did you experience in life, the politics, whatever it might be. Well, then from the conclusion...
Wait. Let me respond before you go to the next one, because I have a question on this one.
Yeah.
I like this now, and I may be getting into the next one. If I am, just say, Charlie, we're going to cover it next. Yeah. But these conclusions, especially driving, is that we take them so personally. Like these people who cut in front of us have targeted us to be their victim of the person they're going to get in front of. They're going to cut off, or they're going to do whatever. It's not about us. It is not a personal issue. This is, you cannot take driving personally. And, well, I guess rarely you can. But I think our conclusions, if we're not careful, that our conclusions sort of rally around what's important to us and that we are important and this other person is not contributing to my value like this other person should.
100%, right? And we actually, let's take it one step further. We actually believe at the moment in time that that's actually the truth.
Oh,
Capital
yes.
T, like that's actually how it is.
Yes.
That's
yes.
how it is. There's no, that's how it is. That's what they've done. Like that's the truth.
So
Right?
that's why it's essential to go on to the rest of your acronym, because if you just stop there, you could stop at not a helpful place.
Right, and underneath that conclusion is the hardware and the software of the brain. And what we realize in step 2 is that these conclusions, the kid and the king, what happens when we're in a situation that is different, new, uncomfortable, or is representative of something in the past and it looks familiar or similar, we will automatically, I mean, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this brilliantly in the book Blink, that we will have this knee-jerk response, and our brains are wired, the limbic system is wired to take in data and quickly come to a conclusion about whether or not we are at danger. So immediately we go to our knee-jerk is danger. So then what happens? If we conclude that this is dangerous, the E in ocean is what emotional reaction did we have? What was our emotional state? So if we concluded that this guy's a bleepity-bleep and he's reckless, well, we may get really angry, right? And so suddenly now I'm in an emotional state based on the conclusion, based on the fact that some guy just drove in front of me and, cut in front of me, and it was, it ruined my driving vibe, man, and, that wasn't what I was intending. That's not what I expected to happen right there, and we're going to get into that in a second. So then from that emotional state, the A in ocean is, well, what action did I take?
And here, might I suggest, is a choice, is it not?
Correct.
The action is a choice. This is not knee-jerk. You're getting to where this is not knee-jerk reaction, but a positive, helpful action. If I caught that right?
It can be, right? So the goal is for it to be, because the next letter N is what was the net result of that action. And
okay.
Did that action move me closer to or farther away from my intended outcome? And remember, we're doing this kind of post-mortem, right? So I'm coming home, I'm really upset, I'm just really triggered. Honey, what's wrong? Right? Well, this guy, I've been doing kung fu movies in my head, I'm just really agitated, right? Well, if we go back and just say, well, what was my outcome? We realized we didn't really have an outcome. We didn't really have we don't really operate with outcomes. We actually operate with expectations. We walk into a restaurant. We expect service. We walk into the office. We expect people to do certain things. We're driving our car. We expect everyone to abide by the rules. And it's in the expectation that's where we get let down. And if we begin to break down our negative emotional responses to things and say, wow, me getting really upset about something I really don't know much about, for the most part, right? There's some and there's always somebody in the audience, well, what about if somebody, and I'm like, yeah, okay, right, that's good, that's fine. But for the majority of the times that I'm in a negative emotional state, I have concluded something false, and that's really where it starts. What else could I have concluded about that objective data?
Oh, so you circle back and go through the process again.
Correct. And so then the work becomes, what it does is sets up the book to actually start to look and evaluate what is in our filter, our childhood experience, our conditioned reality. What did mom and dad say when we were young? What were the events of our childhood? Did I raise my hand in class and did I get yelled at, or was I made fun of, or was I considered dumb, or was I disrespected, or did people make fun of me, or was I, whatever it was? When you start getting down to our adult versions of ourselves and the things that upset us, the goal of the book is to establish a very, very clear mapping of, wow, this is how I react. Holy cow, it was because Johnny in third grade. So for me, my self-sabotaging nature of myself came from walking into my dad's office with a 99 on my exam. My dad just said to me, he's like, well, what did you get wrong? I said, I don't know. And he's like, well, what kind of person is that? How could you? And I was like, instead of getting this emotional cookie of like, good job, son, I was like, you idiot. And he didn't say that, but that's what I felt, right? And so my whole life has been about this perfectionist and looking for that 1% that might be wrong and, overcompensating for making sure that it's 100%. I mean, just exhausting, right? Or not being, not belonging. My go-to as an adult is, I don't belong here. I don't have a degree in that. Or, I'm brown-skinned and Indian. The rest of my friends when I was a kid were Jewish, and we were in the suburb of New York City, and, I don't belong. I don't belong. So when I drive up to the country club in Telluride, Colorado, like all of a sudden I'm like, I don't belong here. That's just sitting there waiting for me, just like John Nash's little voices were running around in my head. That's sitting there so available to me. But now, rather than allowing that to color my experience and conclude that these people don't like me for whatever reason, and that leading to me feeling like angry or insecure or wanting to prove myself or do something boisterous, I can just take a deep breath and be like, these are not the droids you're looking for. No. Okay, little Shasheen, it's okay. I got this. And let the king take the wheel and just say, I know this pattern. It's so familiar. Of course it's going to show up. It's okay. And this brings me to, I think, the main point of the book, and that is these triggers never go away. These childhood experiences left a mark. They're not going to go away until you die. What you do have at your disposal as an adult is to familiarize yourself with the circumstances under which these triggers typically show up, and begin to notice as they're coming up, begin even better to anticipate these situations coming up. And then if you're finding yourself in the middle of it, ID, the emotional state, I stands for intensity, D stands for duration, and ask yourself this question. How intensely do I want to experience this trigger right now, and for how long? And I will tell you, the moment you ask yourself that question, the moment you set yourself free, and you start practicing doing that again and again and again, you're like a ninja. You're like, oh, there it comes again. It's like watching a pitch coming high and outside and be like, I saw that coming off the pitcher's hand. I'm not swinging at that. Ball two. Boom. I'm not even worrying about it.
Let me.
But you start to read it better. Yeah. Go ahead.
Let me tell you a personal story on that. That I so identify, and that is, everybody listening has heard this story. So forgive me, but I think it's very important in that I had a childhood where I felt abandoned. I lived with. After 4 years old, I lived with a handful of relatives that would pass me from one house to another. And so I sort of had this blame for my mother and father for abandoning me and rejecting me. But, my mother and father were divorced when I was 3. My mother worked a graveyard job and, third shift. And so she didn't feel like she could do an adequate job of parenting me. So she she asked me to live with some family members. And then my father, God bless him, loved me to death, but the man was the man was a quart a day drinking alcoholic, and so he was limited in what he could do. His love was great, but he had a disease, he was broken. Yeah. And so they never really, it's not like they abandoned me. It wasn't like I was bad. It wasn't like Charlie is not worth spending attention on. It was that we just don't have the resources, emotional, physical, or financial, to do that. And when I recognize that and I fully embrace that I could have been in their position, I could have been in an awkward job where it wasn't right or good for me to raise a child, or I could have, submitted to my addictions, and then I'm not capable. It gave me such a very different view. And so, like your father, as you started looking at what he was doing during this time, you felt that he was, a perfectionist and hard on you, was from his past, but also from a point of care. So when we just start reframing these past issues, and they're really not so much issues. I mean, now with some people, they're certainly issues. I don't, when you're talking abuse and issues like that, that's a whole different story. But I wanted to tell that story, but then I wanted to get into something else that you talked about that's right in line with this, that I think you were bang on, and you talk about the role of compassion. And I love what you write about in compassion. And that the first person we have to have compassion on is ourself. And we don't have compassion for ourselves. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago I took a retreat. And it was a 10-day retreat, 6 days sequestered silence, where you had no books, no computers, no phones. You had a handwritten journal, and you were just in silence. And I went there. There's an intent, like your objectives that you're talking about. What is the objective that you talk about? Mission.
The outcome of
the outcome. I was not able. I could give love well, but I could not receive love because I never felt I deserved love. So I had a 10-day experience with shaman in Hawaii working with me on this, and it's just turned me around to where I can receive love. I can believe, and I don't mean this pridefully because this is true of everyone, I deserve love. I am a lovable person, except when I'm a dick, then I'm not quite so lovable. But it is a powerful concept. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're pointing to a couple different things. I mean, and the thing about the book and the letter writing exercise is an opportunity to write a letter to your kid. And I think that one of the most important concepts that gets stepped over by most people, including myself, is, well, that was a long time ago, or listen, I've intellectualized the fact that my parents didn't really mean to do anything. We're good now. I understand, they did the best they could. That's you get a lot of that, right? I understand that, Shasheen. I've been to therapy. They did the best they could, and I get that. And I'm like, okay, but the evidence of your life still shows that wound is still really there. And I'm like, okay, well, let's take a look at that. And so in the letter writing to your child, I ask you to really take for a moment a chance to acknowledge the childhood experiences, and you basically write a letter from your king or queen self to this child, and where the letter gives you the space to say, hey, in my case I call Bobby, little Bobby, man, that time when Dad did that was serious. I can remember how terrified, how confused, how frustrated, how angry, how crazed it must have felt for you at that time. And to give voice and give credibility to the fact that in that moment, that was real. It was painful. It was hard. It was whatever, fill in the blank. Right? And I think that we step over that so much. And so now the point is like, okay, let me divide myself up and just say, what if little Bobby went through those things, felt those things, was made fun of that way, whose dad said those things, whose the kids said, all that happened to Bobby? Well, no wonder when I get triggered, Bobby's going to come up, and based on what he experienced, it makes a ton of sense that I would react in that way if Bobby's driving the bus of my life. And for me, that really changed things for me because I got to allow all of that negative, hurtful, painful moments, experiences that happened to me at a time where I didn't have the mental, emotional, or intellectual capacity to process those events in an adult-like fashion. What I call it, kid logic took over. Do you know the number of kids that believe that when their parents divorced, that if they ultimately personalize it, right, that you talk about everything gets personalized, that child personalized everything. They think it's like, if I was a good boy, if I was a better girl, then they wouldn't have done that. Or they conclude falsely about things. I didn't say to myself when I was 10 years old and my dad said, well, where did the other point go? I didn't say, well, Dad, thanks, good on you, man. That's a great lesson. I know how much you love me. I get it, man. That's awesome, dude. Good. That's one to live on. No, at that moment, I'm like, I'm devastated. I don't know if there's ever going to be a way to please this man. I just got kicked in the teeth, rolled around in the dirt. I'm like, man, that's how I experienced it then. So if we can encapsulate those experiences, put that in an identity in the book I call The Kid, now we live in this world where, yes, I actually can understand why it's been so freaking confusing. There's this kid, Bobby, that went through what he went through, and of course, if I let that part of my psyche, and if we take all the psychological studies around that, well, it kind of falls in line. Well, yeah. Based on my experience, that's my conditioned past. It's contained now in this character I call Bobby. Well, sure, if that part of me gets activated, it only makes sense that I don't belong, I'm not good enough, I'll never measure up, I'm a perfectionist. Sure. And at the same time, while that's going on, there is a part of me that I can relate to called the king. And that actually is outcome-driven. That has shown up numerous times. But now, I actually understand this. Oh, the game's up, man. I get it. Under these circumstances, the kid comes in. And you know what? It's really predictable. It's not even that interesting anymore. I got this. Now, the kid's cool, king's here, and the rest of their life, the rest of my life, is the management of the intensity and the duration through which I experience those fears, the yin and the yang, the darkness and the light of life, the contrasting experience of the human emotion, in, I would argue, a really manageable and functional way. Is it true? I don't know. But does it work? I can tell you with 1,000% certainty that you develop a new relationship with this part of your past and your current version of yourself, and you do the work inside the book, you will gain facility over this and spend less time in those triggered states and more time in more resourceful places. And that, ultimately, I tell my clients, it's about better decision-making. This whole book is about making better decisions. Well, how do you make better decisions?
Based on information of ourself.
That's right, exactly.
You know, one thing you suggested, I really like that kind of got you into this subject, and I'd like that writing the letter to the self, and writing it from the king to the kid. And helping lift up the kid, understand the kid, and also let the kid know that the kid has input, but the kid does not have a voice. The kid has some voice, but does not have the controlling voice. And you know what? My guess is, as you suggest this, but you know what's really helpful in those kinds of letters is if you mail it to yourself.
Oh yeah.
And you actually receive that letter in the mail, even though you know you sent this letter to yourself, you receive it in the mail. Yeah. There is something about receiving it in the mail that just that you know really strengthens it even more. So great idea, Shasheen. You've been incredible. You've got so much to say, and I think you probably could work on taking energy pills.
You can tell I love this. I was like, I'm exhausted. It's a long day. I haven't been to New York City in years, and it's like just been walking around the city, meetings, and doing this, tonight. And I'm like, you know what? You get me talking about this. It's just such an important conversation. And I got to tell you, this book is not some I don't even care. I'll give the book away if you can't afford.
Yeah, I'm buying several copies.
There's no sales funnel here. There's nothing to sign up for. There's nothing. It took me 6 years to get this book right where I felt it was worthwhile and it was of value, not just I'm like, here's my book, I'm a coach. No, it's literally the playbook. It is from the heart. It's all heart. It's everything that I could throw at you that I know made a difference for me and my clients. And this is not some theoretical framework. This is a field-tested guide. I mean, this has been, worked through. It's been tested. It's a non-clinical. I've got no degree in this whatsoever. It's just time in the saddle and thousands of people before you. And truly, getting an opportunity to share with an audience. And if you're on this call still, if you're still listening to this, I want to talk to you. Send me an email. Whatever. Just go to the website, reach out, and I think this is an important. I think it's an important conversation for humanity. We can see really big, powerful kids throwing tantrums all over the place, and I wish they could find their kingly selves.
I'm buying copies for my clients and my friends. I'm gonna buy a handful of copies because and I don't. Rarely do I do that. That's not a common thing. So that's how much I thought of the book. Shasheen Shah, what a treat having you on the show today, and I just want to thank you for such awesome insights and for the processes that you have proposed to sort of take over, remaster our inner life, and I think you offer such great insight. Now, everyone can get hold of you. I'm going to have your website on the show notes and a link to the book, and the website is just simply shasheen.com. So. If
Correct.
You don't have to wait for the show notes to look you up and get a hold of you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks for having me on, man. Great conversation.
Yeah. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.